Have you ever been judged by people who knew absolutely nothing about you? If you have, you know how it feels, and you need to hear this story, so smash that like button and stick with me. They called me a monster. They stood in the middle of my tiny living room, their expensive shoes looking completely out of place on my worn-out rug, and they called me a selfish, manipulative gold digger. His parents, Richard and Eleanor Davies, looked at me with a level of hatred I had never seen before, their faces twisted into masks of grief and rage. They were demanding I give back the $742,000 that their dead son, my ex-boyfriend Mark, had left to me in his will. They screamed that I was stealing from his grieving widow and his fatherless child. But little did they know, this inheritance wasn't a prize I had won or a treasure I had schemed for. It was a secret, an apology, and a burden I never asked for. And I was about to find out that the perfect family they were so desperate to protect was nothing but a beautiful, tragic lie. The phone call had come on a Tuesday, a day so painfully ordinary that its memory now feels like a cruel joke. I was a pediatric nurse, and I had just finished a grueling 12-hour shift. My feet ached, my hair was tied in a messy bun, and my mind was a fog of medical charts and the faint, sweet smell of antiseptic. The caller introduced himself as Mr. Henderson, Mark's estate lawyer. The name hit me like a physical blow, knocking the wind from my lungs. Mark. I hadn't spoken his name out loud in over 5 years. We had broken up when we were 24, a messy, heartbreaking split that had felt like the end of the world. He had wanted a life I couldn't fit into, one of corporate ladders and country club memberships, a world his parents had meticulously designed for him. I was just a girl from the other side of town with student loans and a dream of helping people. We were from different worlds, and his parents, Richard and Eleanor, never let me forget it. After we ended things, I heard through the grapevine that he'd married a woman they approved of, Amelia, a beautiful heiress from a family with a comparable portfolio. Then, a few years later, that they'd had a son, Leo. I had compartmentalized him, packed away our memories like old photographs in a dusty attic. And then Mr. Henderson told me Mark was gone. A car accident. Instantaneous, he said, as if that was supposed to be a comfort. I sank onto my sofa, the phone feeling slick in my hand. The lawyer's voice was a low, somber drone, but then he said something that made the world tilt on its axis. He told me Mark's will had been read, and that he had left the majority of his personal estate to me. $742,000. I laughed. A dry, humorless sound escaped my lips. It had to be a mistake, a sick prank. I told him as much. Mr. Henderson, I said, my voice trembling, that's impossible. He has a wife. A child. We haven't spoken in 5 years. You must have the wrong Clara Bell, but there was no mistake. Mark had been meticulous. The will was ironclad. He had left a separate, substantial trust for his son, Leo, and their marital home to his wife, Amelia. But his personal savings, his investments, the money he had earned himself outside of his family's vast wealth, it was all for me. The days that followed were a blur of confusion and a deep, gnawing guilt. Why would he do this? What could it possibly mean? I felt like an intruder in a tragedy that wasn't mine. I imagined his wife, Amelia, a woman I had never met, learning that her late husband had given a fortune to his college girlfriend. I pictured their little boy, Leo, growing up without a father. The money felt dirty, like blood money I had no right to. It sat in a legal limbo, a number on a page that represented a life I couldn't comprehend. I decided, in a haze of grief and guilt, that I had to give it back. It was the only decent thing to do. I would sign whatever papers were necessary to transfer the entire amount to Amelia and her son. It wasn't mine to keep. That's when the Davieses showed up at my door. They didn't call first. They just appeared, their silver Mercedes parked arrogantly in the spot reserved for my building's superintendent. Eleanor's eyes, a cold, piercing blue, swept over my small apartment with undisguised contempt. Richard stood behind her, his arms crossed, a bulldog of a man in a tailored suit. "So this is where you live," Eleanor said, her voice dripping with condescension. It wasn't a question. It was a judgment. "We're here for the money, Clara." "We know what you're doing." I was stunned into silence. I don't know what you mean," I stammered, my hands fidgeting with the hem of my worn cardigan. "Don't play dumb with us," Richard boomed, stepping forward. His presence seemed to shrink the already small room. "You think you can just swoop in and take what belongs to our son's family? After all these years? Did you have some kind of hold on him? Were you blackmailing him?" The accusation was so vile, so far from any reality I knew, that I felt a flash of anger through my confusion. Of course not. I haven't spoken to Mark in 5 years. I was just as shocked as you are. Eleanor let out a short, sharp laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Oh, I'm sure you were. Shocked all the way to the bank. You were never good enough for him, you know. We knew it from the moment he brought you home. A charity case. You saw him as your meal ticket then, and it seems nothing has changed." Her words were surgical, precise, aimed at every insecurity I had ever felt about our relationship. She was right, in a way. I never felt like I belonged in their world of casual wealth and unspoken rules. But I had loved Mark. And he, I believed, had loved me. "That's not true," I whispered, more to myself than to them. "We're giving you one chance to do the right thing," Richard said, his voice low and menacing. "You will sign a document, a renunciation of inheritance. Every penny will go to Amelia and little Leo, as it should. Our lawyers will be in touch. Don't make this difficult." They left as abruptly as they had arrived, leaving behind a toxic silence and the lingering scent of expensive perfume. I collapsed onto my couch, their venomous words echoing in my head. Was that what Mark thought of me? Was this some kind of cruel parting joke? The guilt I felt before was now suffocating me. They were right. The money belonged with his family. I was the outsider, the ghost from a past that should have stayed buried. The next day, I called Mr. Henderson. I told him I wanted to refuse the inheritance. I wanted to sign it all over to Amelia. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Miss Bell," he said finally, his voice careful. "Are you certain about this?" "Mark was very clear in his instructions. I'm certain," I said, my voice thick with unshed tears. "It's the right thing to do." "Very well," he sighed. "However, Mark left something else for you. A small box. His instructions were specific. I was only to give it to you if and when his parents contacted you directly about the will. Since they have, I can now release it to you. Perhaps you should look at what's inside before you make a final decision." A box? What could possibly be in a box that would change anything? My mind raced. Old photos? A piece of jewelry? It felt like a pointless, sentimental gesture. Still, a flicker of curiosity, or maybe just a desperate need for answers, made me agree. I picked it up from his downtown office that afternoon. It was a simple, unadorned wooden box, no bigger than a showbox. It felt heavy in my hands, heavy with the weight of the past. I took it home and set it on my coffee table. For 2 days, I just stared at it. I was terrified of opening it. I was scared it would be filled with things that would make the pain of losing him all over again feel fresh. I was scared it would contain nothing, just an empty gesture that would leave me with more questions. I was scared of what it might ask of me. The Davies' lawyer contacted me, just as they said he would. He sent over the legal documents via a courier. Renunciation of inheritance. It was all there in cold, black and white print. They wanted to meet in 3 days at a neutral location, a conference room at a downtown hotel, to have me sign the papers in front of witnesses. The pressure was immense. My phone rang with unknown numbers that I was too afraid to answer. I felt hunted. Part of me just wanted it all to be over. I could sign the papers, give them the money, and disappear back into my quiet, anonymous life. I could go back to being just Clara Bell, the pediatric nurse, and not Clara Bell, the mysterious heiress. It would be so much easier. The night before the scheduled meeting, I was sitting on my floor, the legal documents spread out before me, the wooden box sitting silently on the coffee table like a silent judge. I couldn't sleep. My heart ached with a profound sadness for a man I hadn't seen in years and a life we never had. Was this what he wanted? For me to just roll over and let his parents bully me into submission? For me to give away this last, baffling message from him without even trying to understand it? Something inside me shifted. It wasn't about the money. It was about Mark. I owed it to him, to the memory of the boy I once loved, to understand why. With trembling hands, I reached for the box and lifted the lid. The first thing I saw was a thick, cream-colored envelope with my name written on it in his familiar, slightly messy handwriting. My breath hitched. Beneath the letter were stacks of photographs, but not of us. They were of his son, Leo. Dozens of them. A baby photo, a picture of him on a swing set, another of him with chocolate all over his face. He was a beautiful boy, with Mark's dark, curly hair and a bright, infectious smile. And at the very bottom of the box was a small, worn, leather-bound book. It was a copy of The Little Prince, the exact edition I had given him for his 21st birthday. I opened the letter first. My hands shook so badly I could barely read the words. My dearest Clara, it began. If you are reading this, then it means 2 things. First, that I am gone. And second, that my parents have behaved exactly as I knew they would. I am so sorry, Clara. I'm sorry for putting you in this position, for dragging you back into the mess that my life became. But I had no one else to trust, and my eyes filled with tears, blurring the ink on the page. I wiped them away and kept reading. Mark's letter was a confession, a plea, and an explanation all at once. His marriage to Amelia had been a transaction, not a romance. It was a merger of 2 powerful families, orchestrated by his father to secure a business deal. He wrote that he and Amelia had been little more than polite roommates. She had her life, and he had his. The devastating truth was that Amelia had been in love with someone else the entire time, a man she'd known since before she'd met Mark. She had been having an affair for the last 4 years. His parents, Richard and Eleanor, knew everything. They had found out years ago but had forbidden Mark from seeking a divorce. The scandal, they'd said, would be ruinous for the family name and their business interests. They had forced him to live a lie, to maintain the facade of a happy, perfect family for the sake of appearances. They controlled him with threats of cutting him off from the family fortune, and more importantly, from his son. They own me, Clara, he wrote. But they don't own what I built myself. The $742,000 wasn't family money. It was his. He had secretly started a small tech company on the side, a passion project based on an idea we had dreamed up together in college, sitting in our tiny apartment eating cheap pizza. It was a company that developed educational software for children with learning disabilities. He had poured every spare moment, every ounce of his creativity, into it, and he had recently sold it for a significant profit. "This money is ours," he wrote. "It was born from our dream. I couldn't let them have it. They would have absorbed it into their empire of lies. I want you to have it. You were the only person who ever saw me, Clara. Not my last name, not my trust fund, just me. Do something good with it. Build something real. Live the life we talked about." And then came the final, heartbreaking part. He explained that the trust fund he set up for Leo was airtight and managed by an independent third party. Leo was more than provided for the rest of his life. His parents couldn't touch it. What they were after was his money, the money he had left to me. It was pure greed. He ended the letter by telling me to look inside the copy of The Little Prince. Tucked within its pages was a single, faded photograph of the two of us, taken on a camping trip years ago. We were young, covered in mud, and laughing without a care in the world. On the back, he had written, "I remember who we were." I sat there on the floor for what felt like hours, the letter in my hand, my heart breaking for the man who had been trapped in a golden cage. The guilt I had been carrying evaporated, replaced by a cold, clear certainty. I finally understood. This wasn't just money. It was his legacy. It was his freedom. It was his final act of defiance against the people who had controlled his entire life. The next morning, I walked into the hotel conference room with my head held high. Richard and Eleanor were already there, sitting on one side of a long, polished table, their lawyer beside them. They looked smug, confident, certain of their victory. Amelia wasn't there. I realized they probably hadn't even wanted her there. This was their show. "Clara," Richard said, a dismissive wave of his hand. "Glad you decided to be sensible. Just sign the documents, and we can all move on with our lives." He slid the stack of papers across the table towards me. I didn't even look at them. I looked directly at him, then at Eleanor. For the first time, I didn't see powerful, intimidating figures. I saw two small, hollow people, clinging to a facade. I slid the papers right back across the table. "No," I said. My voice was calm, steady, and loud in the quiet room. "I won't be signing anything." Richard's face flushed with anger. "What did you say?" "I said no," I repeated, my gaze unwavering. "I know everything," Eleanor scoffed. "You know nothing, you foolish girl." "I know that you knew Amelia was having an affair," I said, my voice dropping slightly, making them lean in. I watched as the color drained from their faces. Their arrogant masks began to crumble. "I know that you forbade Mark from getting a divorce to avoid a scandal that might hurt your business. You trapped him in a miserable, loveless marriage for the sake of your reputation." Richard stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. "That is a slanderous lie." "Is it?" I asked softly. I reached into my bag and pulled out the thick, cream-colored envelope. I didn't have to say what it was. They recognized Mark's handwriting instantly. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. "He told me everything, Eleanor. How you controlled him, how you threatened him. He also told me that this money has nothing to do with your family. He earned it himself, from a company he built based on a dream he and I shared. And he left it to me because he trusted me, which, it seems, is more than he could say for either of you." The room was utterly silent. Their lawyer looked back and forth between us, his professional composure completely gone. "He also made it very clear," I continued, pressing my advantage, "that his son, Leo, is more than taken care of. So this little performance isn't about protecting a grieving widow and her child. It's about greed. You wanted this last piece of him that you couldn't control. But you can't have it. It's his legacy. And I am going to protect it. I stood up, my legs feeling surprisingly strong. I looked at the two of them, their faces a mixture of shock, fury, and utter defeat. They were speechless. For the first time in their lives, perhaps, someone they considered insignificant had taken away their power. You will not contact me again, I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. If you do, I will be forced to share the contents of this letter with people who might find it very, very interesting. I believe the term is breach of fiduciary duty to a shareholder, isn't it, Richard? I walked out of that room without looking back, leaving the wreckage of their lies scattered on the polished table behind me. The vindication I felt wasn't triumphant or joyful. It was a quiet, somber peace. I grieved for Mark, for the life he should have had, for the happiness his parents had stolen from him. But I also felt a profound sense of purpose. He had trusted me, and I would not let him down. I didn't spend the money on myself. I used it to create the Leo Foundation, a non-profit organization that develops and distributes the very same kind of educational software Mark's company had created, providing it for free to underprivileged school districts. It was his dream, and mine, brought to life. It was a tribute to the man he was, not the man his parents tried to force him to be. I live a simple life still. I never moved out of my small apartment. I still work as a nurse because I love it. But now, my life is also filled with the joy of seeing Mark's legacy help thousands of children. I never saw Richard or Eleanor again. Sometimes, I think about Amelia and hope that she found a way to be happy and free. And every year, on Leo's birthday, my foundation makes an anonymous donation to his trust fund, a quiet promise for me to Mark that I will always look out for his son. So if you've ever been made to feel small, if you've ever been underestimated or judged unfairly by people who don't know your heart, remember my story. Your worth is not determined by their opinion. Truth has a way of coming to light, and kindness is a strength they can never take from you. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had to stand up to someone who tried to tear you down. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this one.